Hey guys, what's going on? This video is going to be on the steps you would go through to remove a spark plug wire, take out the spark plug, do an inspection on both of them, and then properly reinstall them on the car. I'm going to do it for one cylinder. You would just repeat the steps for the remainder of them until you had all of them finished. So for this, I'm going to do cylinder number 4 right here. That's the one that I currently have a spark plug in. So when you go to take the wires off, you want to be very careful that you do not rip the spark plug wire out of the boot. When you do rip it out, it'll look something like this, where the actual boot of it just gets ripped off, then the wire is no good at that point. So you want to make sure you grab the actual boot part, not the wire. If you give it a little twist and pull, they usually pop off. We're going to then go to the other end of it and take that side off too. Now you only want to do one wire at a time. As you can see, it can start to get a little confusing the way they kind of route them across the engine. This one's not too complicated, but some cars with a lot more wires on them, it gets really confusing. So now that we have the wire off, we're going to go ahead and do the inspection on the wire. You want to check and make sure there's no cracks, tears, the ends are connected, and you can see the metal clips there. Same thing on this side, you can see the metal clip down in there. A problem would look like this, where an end got ripped off. In this case, this was one where a mouse actually chewed on it and chewed through the insulation. We went ahead and bent a little more and broke it. Now you can actually see the insides of it. Or another example would be this here, where it got cut by something, a sharp engine part, or if somebody accidentally cut it with scissors somehow. And the far more common one that I see is this here, where it doesn't get cut all the way through, but the insulation gets abraded a little bit. What's going to end up happening is a spark will go through the wire, but rather than finish going through to the spark plug, it will actually jump out of the wire right here, and then it'll jump to wherever what piece of metal is closest. For example, what I typically see is where it rubs on the corner of a valve cover, and the spark would go ahead and jump out right here and then return to the ground of the vehicle. So any cuts like this also make it unacceptable. So now that the spark plug wire is off, we're going to go ahead and measure the resistance of the wire, as it appears to be in good condition. Now the one thing I noticed about this is the top is a little swollen. Probably means oil leaked onto it because of a leaky valve cover gasket. If it gets too much worse than this, you'd probably want to go ahead and replace that. We're going to take our multimeter and we are going to set it to resistance, ohms. And I'm not a fan of setting things on batteries, however, I couldn't get it to sit on any other part of the engine. So one lead is going to go on that ends, the other lead is going to touch the metal over here, and we get 7.47 k ohms, otherwise known as 7,470 ohms of resistance. I generally consider anything over 2,000 ohms of resistance to be acceptable. What I see as far as specification goes is you're supposed to have 2,000 ohms per foot. I've never really seen that hold true, so as long as I see a couple thousand ohms of resistance, I'm happy. What you do not want to see would be this. Oh well, that means there is no connection, there is no resistance. That would be a problem right there. So if you saw that, the wire is broken internally, or one of the connections is broken off. But if you see a wire like this, you know you have an issue and you need to replace the wire. Alright, now that the spark plug wire is out of the way, you've checked the resistance on it, we're going to go ahead and take out the actual spark plug. You're going to use a spark plug socket that has the rubber insert inside there to kind of hold onto the plug, help you take it out, a long extension, and I generally like using a longer ratchet, a little more leverage. And then there you have it. I'm going to go ahead and carefully snap that out. And first thing we'll do is take a general look at the condition of it. It's got a little bit of oil on it, not the end of the world. But what I have here is a picture that has a lot of the common issues you would see with the spark plug, anywhere from the normal to oil fouled, pre-ignition where it's actually being destroyed, or this one where it ends up too hot and the two actually bridge together, which would cause a misfire. The one we have the most issue with is carbon fouling, because our lab cars never get driven on the road. They never get really hot, they never burn off the carbon on there. So if we take a look at this spark plug, you'll see on the back of it, or on the center here, it's really dark. There's a lot of black powdery stuff on there. That's going to be the carbon, because the engine doesn't get hot, it doesn't burn that off. If I spin it around this side, you can see where it's white. That's what we really want to see. A good spark plug should be fairly white in the center and on the electrodes. More along the lines of what that spark plug looks like. Now, if I ran this car, got it really hot, most of that would probably burn off and everything would be good, but as it sits right now, this would be considered a carbon fouled spark plug. Next thing we're going to do with this spark plug is check the gap on it. According to all data, they say the gap for this engine should be 1.0 to 1.1 millimeters, or 0.039 to 0.043, 39 thousandths to 43 thousandths. I'm going to go ahead and use the inches one, the 40 thousandths. Several different tools to do that. This one's probably the most common that most people have. What you do is you start on the thinnest side, slide it around gently until it stops, and that might be difficult to see, but right there it says 0.040, so this spark plug is correctly gapped. If it was too small, you can use the hole right here to gently bend those up, but there's no way to bend them back down with this tool. Another style that some people have are these. It works in a similar fashion. I'll do the millimeters one this time. So you put it on the narrow part, slide it over until it stops, and right now I'm there where it says 1.0 millimeters, so that's once again acceptable. This tool also has a way to go ahead and bend it up if you needed to make it larger. This one still does not make it smaller. The third tool, and what I think is the most appropriate for inspecting plugs and adjusting them, is this one with the different wire gauges on the outside. Right here is the 0.040 40 thousandths wire. Take that, and it should very gently kind of snap in and out. If it does not, we can use this piece to bend it down. Bend it down. Or what I like about this is, if it is too small, which it is now, my 40 thousandths wire doesn't fit in there, I can go ahead and also bend it up. Now, these electrodes are very, very soft. They bend very easy, so you have to be gentle. And now, a little too much. Now that very gently snaps in and out, I have my gap correctly set. Now that I've inspected my spark plug, I know that it's carbon fouled. I could clean it up, a little bit of brake cleaner or something, or I could replace the spark plug. Since these are good plugs, they're just carbon fouled from not getting hot, I'm going to go ahead and reinstall it in the engine. To put it back in the engine, what you're going to do is once again use your spark plug socket. Gently snap that in. Some people will say you're supposed to put an anti-seize coating on here. Unless you have iron heads, you are not supposed to use that anymore. The only time you would not do that is if you use the nickel anti-seize. But generally, most manufacturers are saying put them in dry. Do not put anything on them. They already have a coating which keeps them from seizing up. If you have iron heads, that's a different story, but almost everything's aluminum now, so we're putting our spark plugs back in dry. Now you notice I threaded that in by hand. Do not use a ratchet to thread that back in. It's very easy to cross thread the socket into the cylinder head, and then you damage the cylinder head, and that can be very difficult to fix. If you do it by hand, you're never going to cross thread them. Now that that is threaded all the way down, I'm once again going to look at my torque spec. According to all data, this spark plug is supposed to be torqued down to 13 foot-pounds. If you look on the box of the spark plugs, a lot of times they'll have the torque spec or they'll have an angle spec for you. Going to turn on the torque wrench. "13 foot-pounds" is what that says now. If I needed to change the units, I can just press the units button here, but 13 is what I need. It doesn't take very much to tighten these. It's a pretty low number. And if you give that kind of a gentle wiggle, or you just kind of wobble it around, it'll come back out. Now that my spark plug is inserted without cross threading and it is properly torqued, I'll go ahead and put my spark plug wire back on. Now if you were doing this for real, you'd want to go ahead and put in like a little silicone in here so that it doesn't stick to the spark plug. Because we're a school and we take these on an awful lot, I leave the silicone off, otherwise it gets really messy. So we're going to go ahead and take this, snap it back on, and you should feel kind of pop on. There it goes. And then if you gently try to pull up, it should not come back off. And because we did these one at a time, we know exactly the route that it follows, and we know exactly which post that it goes on. If you get these switched up, remember, the car's not going to start right. So do them one at a time. You would go ahead and repeat that process for the remainder of the cylinders, and then you would have all of your spark plugs inspected. Now, one thing I do want to show you is this one here is an example of one that has been soaked in oil. This valve cover gasket leaked really bad. The oil caused this to swell up. Even the bottom is swollen up. So this would be one where you'd really want to replace the wire, because this is going to cause it to get stuck in there. A couple other things to consider is that some plugs are platinum, which means they have like a little needle point in there. You can check the gap on these, but you got to be very careful you don't damage that tip. Generally, if these are not within spec, if there's too much of a gap there, you're supposed to replace them, do not adjust them. Some of these new plugs, really you just check them to make sure they're where they're supposed to be. And if they ever got out of spec, you always replace them. And the last thing that I set off to the side that I forgot to grab is, this is also a common thing that I see often on spark plugs, which is a broken ceramic. If I hold it up this way, spark plug looks totally normal. I've got my typical gap in there, I don't see any problems. However, when I go to put this in my cylinder and I tip it upside down, that piece of ceramic has now fallen down, covered up my spark plug gap, and now my spark will not ignite my air and fuel. This would cause a misfire. So I like to take my spark plugs, hold them upside down, make sure that ceramic is not broken to where you put it in upside down, all of a sudden it covers the gap, and now the spark can't do what it's supposed to do. So one other thing you want to take a look at, always hold your spark plugs upside down, take a look at that. Alright guys, that covers everything as far as checking your wires and checking your spark plugs. Any questions, go ahead and throw comments at the bottom. Thanks for watching.